Physicists first started trying to split atoms in the 1930s. Nuclear fission was first discovered in 1938, and scientists quickly realized that this could be used both for electricity and weaponry. By 1942, an experimental reactor was built underneath Stagg Field at the University of Chicago as part of the Manhattan Project. They used what they learned to build a production reactor to create weapons-grade plutonium, and in July 1945, the United States bombed both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was the first time much of the world had even heard about nuclear power. But by August of 1945, so the next month, there was a widely distributed pamphlet called The Atomic Age, which called for peaceful use of nuclear power for a fossil-free future. First started building nuclear power plants in the early 1950s. Eisenhower really pushed for nuclear energy to the UN, and the United Kingdom actually opened the world's first commercial nuclear power station in 1956, which was not only for producing electricity, but also for producing plutonium for the British nuclear weapons program. Nuclear energy was also being used in submarines and gaining a lot of traction around the globe during the 1970s oil crisis. That actually prompted France to build 25 nuclear power plants over the next 15 years, and now 71% of their energy is nuclear. However, the 1979 Three Mile Island accident and the Chernobyl disaster in 1986 turned much of the public away from this energy source, which is understandable. This led to over 120 reactor proposals being canceled in the United States. A lot has happened since the 80s. Carbon dioxide emissions and rapidly changing global climate has pushed the next generation to take a second look at nuclear power and think, maybe it's not all bad. Japan announced in 2022 that they were going to reopen 10 nuclear power plants that had been shut down since the Fukushima incident in 2011. Nuclear power has been quite interesting for tech companies investing heavily in AI, as well as its use in military and space operations. And there's a lot of money going towards that right now in the United States for new companies to develop SMRs, or small nuclear reactors. Is nuclear power safe? Despite high-profile events like Fukushima, nuclear power still has one of the lowest fatalities per unit of energy generated compared to other sources. About 9% of the world's energy is now produced by nuclear power plants, which is the second largest green energy source behind hydroelectricity. There's around 416 civilian fission reactors in the world, with 63 additional plants under construction and an additional 87 planned. Most of our safety precautions for most things come from mass tragedies. Nuclear fission was discovered by physicists that understood how dangerous this technology could be. The first practical application was literally dropping a bomb that incinerated 70,000 civilians instantly. These scientists pushed for a lot of regulations and safeguards, which is not really something we've gotten from other energy sources. No one started digging up coal and then announced to the world, hey guys, this stuff's kind of bad for our lungs. Maybe we should filter out some of this particulate. They couldn't account for every scenario, of course, but there have only been 3 major nuclear power production incidents: 3 Mile Island in 79, Chernobyl in 86, and Fukushima Daiichi in 2011. 3 Mile Island involved a severely damaged reactor, but no radiation leaks. The incident in Chernobyl in modern-day Ukraine was absolutely horrific and caused by a steam explosion and subsequent fire. Chernobyl had some nightmarish effects to the civilians and the environment, and the consequences are difficult to overstate and are, for all intents and purposes, permanent. The disaster at Fukushima was caused by an earthquake, and the subsequent tsunami killed over 19,000 people, but there were no casualties due to radioactivity. The fuel for the reactors is not enriched beyond 5%, which is much too low for any kind of explosives, and there's a lot of safety equipment and backup safety equipment in these plants to ensure we don't accidentally irradiate the entire planet again. We didn't even figure out that the core on 3 Mile Island had melted until 2011 because there weren't any outward indicators, and all the containment features and fail-safes actually worked to keep the radiation inside the plant instead of leaking it out into the atmosphere and our environment. First experimental reactors in Idaho were actually tested to destruction to ensure that the fission reactions would automatically shut down in those scenarios. They aren't even a great target for terrorism because of their design. It would take a ridiculous amount of explosives to even get past all the radiation shields. The US and Russia didn't even bother to target each other's nuclear plants during the Cold War because they were seen as too difficult to damage. Since the Fukushima disaster, most are now equipped with sensors that will detect earthquakes and shut down the reactors automatically. Because most nuclear plants are close to water, because that's what they use to cool the reactors, most of them are outfitted with seawalls in order to keep excess water out. But what happens if the opposite happens and all of the water dries up? Most power plants are built close to a source of water, like a river or an ocean, because they use the water to cool the reactors. But due to climate change and drought conditions in Europe, some nuclear reactors have recently had to be powered down. Romania only has one nuclear power plant, and they had to take it offline due to the Danube's historically low water levels. That plant made up 20% of their electrical generation abilities, and they had to restart a coal power plant in order to make up the difference. Romania was able to restart that plant earlier in the week, but now Hungary is sinking barges in the Danube to try and raise the water levels there to keep its only nuclear power plant operational, because that accounts for a third of their electricity. As of August 12th, 13 out of 57 of France's reactors were either shut down or running at a reduced capacity for similar reasons, as well as what was described as a massive influx of jellyfish. Switzerland has an issue right now where their river's water is too hot, and if it gets much hotter, they'll either have to shut down their reactors or reduce its output. It's been a really hot year in Europe, so they're using more electricity than usual while also running out of power. Some experts are estimating that between the heat and the disconnected power plants, that Europe will lose around 180 billion euros, or 207.7 billion US dollars, or 1% of the EU's GDP. SMRs, or small nuclear reactors, are really hot right now. Every billionaire and tech conglomerate that you see in your nightmares has either created their own SMR startup or has thrown a ridiculous amount of cash towards any gathering of nerds that just whispers nuclear as they pass by. So what are they? Why are they getting a bunch of attention? Are we in a nuclear renaissance, and should you invest in this? Many of these new companies tout SMRs as a way to quickly deploy green energy production to areas that aren't connected to the grid, like military battlefields, or to provide in-house electricity, like for AI data centers. They're supposed to be relatively low cost, prefabricated off-site, and have all of the normal nuclear fission chain reactions taking place in an economical, compact case. It sounds really cool, but the only countries with operational SMRs are China and Russia. There are over 136 different SMR designs, and none of them can pass U.S. safety regulations, and these companies are lobbying to have the regulations reduced. Some of these startups, including Oklo, which received over $200 million from the U.S. government, refuse to let nuclear regulators actually look at their designs, so they haven't moved forward in the certification process, yet continue to collect investments both from retail traders and the American taxpayer. There are a lot of debates on whether what these companies are proposing is physically possible, much less economically viable, and they worry about neutrons escaping these small nuclear reactors and irradiating the coolants at the very least, as well as several concerns about radioactive waste material collection and safety. Different estimations that compare the cost of electricity produced via SMR to the cost of electricity produced by traditional nuclear facilities found it significantly more expensive, in some cases more than double the price per kilowatt hour. The Federal Office for Radiation Protection in Germany pointed out that less power generated by each reactor means we would need more SMRs around the world to produce electricity, meaning more possible sources of radiation and a higher likelihood that something could go wrong with just one of them. Startups are trying to move ridiculously quickly. California has a ban on new nuclear construction, and yet a company named Bluecore Energy is trying to skirt this by saying small nuclear reactors don't count, and they're planning to float a bunch of SMRs on barges at the port of Long Beach. They still have not applied with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but are supposed to meet with the Port Authority on Monday, if that interests you. Appalachian Power in Campbell County, Virginia, is also pushing for SMRs. They're proposing a project that would allegedly power 400,000 homes, which to me seems like a bit overkill for a county with 55,000 residents. They say they have no identified consumer for this excess power, and they also don't have an SMR provider picked out or any idea what they're going to do with the waste, but they want to have the first functional SMR in the country. Atixis Corporate and Investment Banking said earlier this year that SMRs are still a long way from commercial viability. Personally, I think that a lot of these SMR companies are extremely fishy, and I don't appreciate them trying to change the rules or push their projects through. I'm cautiously optimistic about nuclear energy as a whole, but I don't really know if privatizing radioactive material is really the answer to our energy crisis. What do you think? Is this big oil propaganda? Do you believe in the future of SMRs? Here's a list of SMR and other nuclear stocks. Let me know in the comments how you feel about the nuclear renaissance and if you're going to invest.